Today we're going to be talking about how Black Panther, not just a movie, but the comic books, can be used as a form to engage young black males in literacy. So to start off with, Black Panther has been a pretty important figure most of my life. I remember reading Black Panther comic books as a child, and I'm sure many of you do as well. But Black Panther followed me all the way through to college. In the second semester, while working on my master's degree, there was a job call to work in the summer reading to children. And since my graduate assistantship didn't pay for my summers, I needed a job. So I thought, hey, reading to kids, teaching kids to read, I'm in, let's do it. So I filled out the application, and soon afterwards, I was given an opportunity to interview over the phone. So the phone interview went well for the first part. Asked me some very basic questions, my college level and some of my scores and some of my grades, some general background, basic information. And then the woman on the phone asked me a really interesting question. She asked me, what was the last book that you read? And I was like, oh man, great question. I can handle this one. I was like, the last book I read was The Secrets of the Samurai. And I had just finished reading it too. So I knew I was going to get all these questions right. I just knew I had it right. And she goes, The Secrets of the Samurai. She goes, tell me about it. Oh, well, it was all about the Tokugawa clan and how they pretty much took over Japan and how they changed the feudal system and made Japan what it is today. She goes, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Well, you had the Tokugawa clan and you had the samurai and you had the ruling class and how the people and the samurai and the shogunates, and went over all of that stuff, right? I was nailing everything. And she was like, tell me something about the characters. And I was like, there's not much to say about the characters. It was mostly about the Tokugawa clan and the samurai and the ruling class. Well, tell me a little bit more about the people. And I was like, well, it's not real. Oh, I said, I think I got it. I said, well, no, it was a historical book about the samurai. She goes, oh, okay. And she went on, she asked me some other questions, and I didn't think anything about it at the time. Until a week later, I got the notice saying that I didn't get the job. And I was thinking, how could I not get the job? How could I not get the job? I answered all the questions correctly. I was on fire. So I emailed her back and I was like, hey, thank you for letting me know I didn't get the job and I appreciate the interview time. Could you tell me a little bit why I didn't get the job or what did I do wrong on the interview? And she goes, okay, I'll get back with you. So she got back with me a couple of days later. She says that she went over what she was going to say with me with her boss, to make sure that she got it right. And she told me that the reason why I didn't get the job is because I couldn't talk about the characters in the novel very well. I couldn't articulate the characters of the novel very well. So I emailed her back. I was like, you asked me the last book that I read, not the last novel that I read. I was thinking that because I'm a grad student, you were asking me questions about the last book that I read. Do I still love and do I still enjoy reading, even though I'm busy in grad school and even though it's the summertime and I could be doing other things, do I still enjoy reading? So I read a historical book about the history of the samurai. There were no individual characters. I couldn't have answered that question correctly because there was no information to give you for that answer. I was like, had you asked me some historical things, I could have done that. Or had you asked me about the last novel that I read, about the characters in that novel, I could have gladly and enthusiastically answered those questions about the character, about the plot, the themes, the setting, all of those things, the motivation, the protagonist, antagonist, symbolism, all of that. I could have nailed that. But that's not the last book that I read, and you asked me the last book that I read. And then I went, but now that I think about it, if you were asking me what type of character I would identify with, what character could you actually think of that a young black male can identify with that wasn't a former slave or didn't have something related to slavery? So that may not have been the best way to send my response, but that's what I did. I was a little bit younger at the time, and I was a little bit uncouth, right? And so afterwards, after I sent that email, I was like, what character would I identify with? And what character would a young black male identify with? And I was like, Black Panther. So when the movie came out, I was especially happy because I knew that it was going to have the impact that it did. So I wound up writing a paper about this years before the movie came out, just because I recognized that how important of a literary figure that Black Panther could be, especially through the comic books, because the Black Panther talked about so many issues within the comic that would be engaging for young black men. So engaging children, young people especially, with comic books is a great way to learn. The common assumption that kids are just reading comic books, they're not really reading, but actually reading a comic book takes a higher level of skill than just reading a textbook or a novel. Why? Because you have some of the same elements of a novel, and as we see in some good movies, there's theme, there's setting, there's plot, some of the things that we all know that make up a good movie. But when you read it in a comic book, the reason why it's important is that comic books are not always linear. So sometimes they start in the middle, they go to the beginning, just like some or a lot of really good books. But comic books especially takes a greater skill level because a comic book panel may sometimes go across the page, or there may be a smaller pic inside the main frame that's related to something else. And then sometimes there may be a page here that's related to a page at the bottom, but artistically you have to match all the different elements to be able to tell the story. So getting through a comic book or what people would call a graphic novel is actually a high form of literacy. So don't underestimate that. Children who read graphic novels and read comic books can learn just as much from a novel. But what is it about the movie that can be used as a learning tool, and what is it about the comic books that can be used as a learning tool? Well, you can go through a Black Panther comic and you can pick out things such as themes and costumes and color, but as well as character traits, right? And understanding character traits is the first step of being able to analyze a really good novel. But if you wanted to transpose this to a movie, you can go through the movie of Black Panther and try and look at all of the different characters and look at the symbols and the colors that they're represented and how that plays a role into the different tribes of Africa and how that plays a role in the character's development and also the character's personality and character traits. So you can take the comic book as well as the movie together and then individually and do comparison contrast. You can learn about Black history because most Black Panther comics have something to do with Black power at some point. Sometimes it's subvert, may not be upvert, but sometimes it's subvert. And there's some of those themes in the movies as well. So you can go through the comic book and look for some of those things, and then you can also go through the movies and look at some of those themes and some of the colors, and some of the shapes and designs, and try and recognize the different tribes and how that plays a role in Africa. And you can do the same thing with comic books. For example, some of you may be aware that in the comic books, Black Panther married Storm from the X-Men. So why is that important? Because Storm is known as a goddess. She's a weather witch from a small tribe in Africa. But did you know there really is a tribe in Africa of women who manipulate the weather? Well, that's it for this episode. We'll see you next time.